Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I think most folks were on last time, but while I'm giving a little introduction, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And we always want to welcome new partners and everyone who's here. You are you are the coalition, and we are here to be together. So, of course, always give feedback throughout, and we're always open to hearing what you have to say, which is why last meeting, this topic came up, and so we decided that this meeting would continue the conversation that was requested, which was related to youth and cannabis. We'll look at some data today that we have, and more so the data that's not the quantitative data, but the qualitative data and some of those local conditions that we have. But we'll also get to thinking about what are the data that we want to know and that we want to collect. We'll hear in small groups about what we hear and what we see in the community, and they'll be facilitated by Michelle and me and Brian, and really to look towards what kind of new coalition work that we'll be embarking on into the future, and what's needed around preventing youth cannabis use in our communities. So we will have a micro training that Em prepared for this, and then we'll really get into it in our small groups like last time. But before we do that, I think we have mentioned before, and I'll mention again, that we really want to focus and ground ourselves in health equity and in equity. And we've been working on the ground rules related to equity that have been shared in the community. And we are now going to be talking about number 5. Am I right on that? Yes, number 5. And so I just want to have us focus in, and if we can all just listen and take this in, I'll read it twice. We agree that no one should be required or expected to speak for their whole race, gender, age cohort, or population. We cannot, even if we wanted to. So I'll just read that again so that we can take it in. We agree that no one should be required or expected to speak for their whole race, gender, age cohort, or population. We cannot, even if we wanted to. And before we move towards Em's micro training, just wanted to frame a little bit of this cannabis conversation. And hi, everyone who's joining. I see more people are coming in. A little bit of the landscape in the Lamoille Valley that's relevant to know, and that some folks may not have heard yet or know about. But as most of us are aware, retail cannabis is here and coming to Vermont. Licenses are not able to be given out quite yet, but integrated licenses applications are already able to be submitted, and applications for retail cannabis licenses open for September or so. But what's important to know is that since town meeting day, we have a few more towns that opted in. So now in the Lamoille Valley, Hardwick, Wolcott, Johnson, Morristown, and Cambridge all opted in to cannabis retail. Not all of them have language in those articles that also were related to integrated licenses, but anyway, that's another conversation. Eden opted out, and other towns are considering and talking about cannabis on this policy level. So currently the rulemaking is still happening in the legislature, and we have lots of information on that on our website in the policy piece. There are concerns currently about some of the legislation that is moving through the State House related to potency levels And there's also a lot of ambiguity around some of the regulations and controls that our local towns who have opted in may have or may not have. So there's a lot still to be decided, and that should be just the policy framing for the conversation that we'll jump into, that's really about hearing a lot from all of you. So I think we're ready to launch into M's micro training, but be thinking along the way of what you're hearing in the community. What are you seeing, like your own experience, firsthand related to cannabis? And thanks for coming. Again, if you wanted to drop in the chat who you are, and I think that's how we'll do the introductions, but then we'll be in small groups. We can get to know each other better.
Are you ready for me to share the video?
Please. Thanks, Brian.
Hello and welcome to Healthy Lamoille Valley's Coalition mini training. Today's topic is logic models. A logic model tries to answer the following questions for us. What is a problem that we're seeing in this community? Why is it happening? And most importantly, why is it happening here? So why are logic models so important to our work? Well, first of all, they help us to prioritize our work in the community. And they do that by helping us to know what needs to be changed in the community. And they help us to know who in the community can make that change happen. Now, let's take a look at a cannabis logic model for our community. Let's identify the problem that we're addressing today, which is underage cannabis use. And we do know some of the root causes for this. Vermont has favorable laws and policies towards cannabis use. There are favorable social norms towards cannabis use, and also a low perception of harm from cannabis use. So what we want to focus on today is what are the local conditions that are making this possible? So let's look at some examples of possible local conditions. For instance, a possible local condition could be parents are using cannabis in front of their children. Another one could be youth always party after winning a game, or youth are smoking cannabis in the bathrooms at school. Local conditions really do paint a picture of what's happening in the community. So today we want to ask, what are you seeing happening in your community? And that is today's breakout group activity. So when you're in your breakout groups today, ask, what are some things happening in your community that you see as contributing to the problem of youth using cannabis? So when you're in your breakout groups, you want to designate a note taker. You want to brainstorm what you're seeing happening, discuss it, and then report back to the group.
All right, so there are 3 different breakout rooms, and they each have a different topic. And I believe you'll be able to choose which room you want to go into. So room 1 is youth, parents and caregivers, and schools, or people who work at schools or who work with youth. Room 2 is policy and retail environments. And room 3 is healthcare, treatment, recovery, and other.
Okay, so I'm going to open the breakout rooms. I've actually, I think, assigned everybody, because I know most of you, into one of those rooms. If you feel that you've been put in the wrong room, then come back out and I'll be in the central and we can talk about where you might be better fit. And we actually, I think, only will have the first and the third given who's here today. So Thank you. And there's in the chat is the notes, which is a Google Doc that everybody should have access to as well. So, and that will have the questions in. So we will open those breakout rooms now. So welcome back. Hopefully that was a good discussion and insightful. So what we'd like to do now is kind of have a share out from each of the rooms. We'll start with the youth room because it's my guess that most of the information is going to come from those who are working most often directly with youth. And then there may be some more response or community level things that come out or can be added on from the healthcare treatment recovery. And so Brian, does your room have a spokesperson?
We didn't pick a spokesperson, but if anyone from our group would like to, you can look at the notes too. I took a bunch of notes, or just report what you remember. Doesn't have to be everything we talked about, but yeah.
I can share a little of what we said. So in terms of norms and how do norms play like a role in use, we talked a lot about how with like media nowadays and how it's obviously legalized and how, you know, parents might use CBD or use marijuana, or like people in the community view kind of like as a social recreational thing or like medicinal. We just overall thought that it was kind of normalized, and that you know, people don't really see it so much as like a gateway drug or like anything that's too worrisome. They kind of equate it to like drinking or that kind of risk. And some common misperceptions that we said was that a lot of people, you know, claim to use it for medicine. Obviously, in some cases, that's like a valid thing. People have like, you know, medical permits or what have you. But we said that it's, you know, in lots of movies or TV shows recently, like memes and internet culture, it's pretty casually just shown. And we also said that people think that it's not addictive or that you can't be dependent on it. And some misconception or some like adult perceptions about youth using cannabis, or youth perceptions as well. So youth don't seem to think that many kids are using it at the middle school level, but they tend to think that older kids do. It's like more in the high school level, and you hear it pretty casually in daily conversations if you're in high school. But other than that, the younger age group isn't so much talking about it. And we also think that over the course of the past few decades or just history, that it's gone from kind of like the stoner hippie drug that, you know, wasn't legal but was kind of just accepted, to more of like this universal drug, I guess, that people see everywhere in like movies and celebrities, and kind of people like that they look up to are often like using weed sometimes. So people think that, you know, it's not this harmful thing, but it's more so just like an everyday thing. And there's also lots of like normalization of using it for medical reasons like anxiety or kind of like self-prescriptions. And we also said that they're consuming it through vaping, smoking. And for interventions, we said that it's important to kind of reach for like the higher up people, like legislators, kind of like educate them, and also store owners who supply like CBD or like weed, things like that.
Awesome. Any other insights from that group that you want to share? Okay, Michelle and Alison, your group.
I did take some notes also. Michelle, are you out there? But if anybody does want to jump in, can feel free. Just can give the broad strokes. I'll just jump in with that. A real concern about the landscape now, especially around edibles. We talked about from the, in particular, the EMS perspective, and and really thinking about how much it's become normalized, especially since legalization. So maybe the conversations are not as many conversations now. It just seems like, of course, it's going to pass, like everyone's going to opt in. No one's really talking about it, but more conversations were happening around legalization. And even since then, with people, with home grow and whatnot, we were hearing stories of, youth coming home with seeds. I want to start a garden, they think they're going to make money. And, it's like an entrepreneur kind of thing, or just so normalized about what is this here. And that's, the normalizing for adults, but also how that the perception of harm decreases, and it decreases for youth as well. In more people just since legalization having weed out in the home, or talking about it, or us seeing more cannabis in the community. And I think one of the things I'll just mention, and then other people can speak, what I heard was a real need to help educate the medical community that there's some backlash coming, and also the mental health community of, oh, there's not so much to worry about with cannabis, it's not such a big deal, or it's not going to be such a big deal, but not understanding the high potency levels, or not understanding all the potential medical risks and community. And then when there's more demand on our, direct service folks, then how that impacts community, the communities. So I think I was hearing from the group that how might we continue to do some of that education, so that there's not so much backlash against someone like some of the folks who are here, when you say something that everyone says, oh, no, like they'll brush it off. So did someone want to speak? I don't know, some of the people who were sharing some of those stories, and I probably missed a lot, but it's definitely captured in the notes.
So I'm curious, and this wasn't necessarily one of the discussion questions in breakout rooms, but for those of you who are in either treatment or recovery, what are you starting, or EMS, what are some of the things that you're actually starting to see? Now, obviously you have to protect confidentiality, so we don't want like real specific examples, but like, are you starting to see people coming in presenting with cannabis related either issues around
Steve shared in our group. Steve, do you want to share? And also I would say, Liam, do you also want to share your experience so far? Both of you, your stories were very helpful.
Yeah, I can go. So I'm a EMS crew, and I'm less than 10% of the call, so I can speak to the ones that I've been on, and I haven't done a data search for all of them. These are my experiences over the last couple of years. So one was edibles, where it was unwittingly eaten by someone who didn't know, because it was packaged as candy. So it was a Kit Kat bar. Somebody was in the house, didn't know that thing that looked like a Kit Kat bar wasn't a Kit Kat bar. Ate it, got scared. They didn't know what was happening to them. Again, no trip to the hospital, not life-threatening. And so that is a point on the medical side, that we need to capture that data for an ambulance call that doesn't necessarily go to the emergency room, because it does impact EMS, even if they don't make it to the ED. The other ones that I've been involved in were edibles, baked edibles, where people just messed up the dosage. Again, they get scared. They get to a point of the anxiety where they just get scared and they just dial 911. And they don't. It's the good thing about it is that it's not life threatening when they do that. But the concern that we shared in our group was that the level of incidence is going to go up. And then I know, Alison, we looked a lot at the data, but for pediatric ingestion, which would be like a 5-year-old just eating something because they thought it looked like candy. These things were occurring in the years where these were starting to be sold in New England, maybe down in Massachusetts or another state. So they were becoming more available. Somehow they made it into Vermont, but now we're talking about a very wide distribution of these edible products, going from very little availability to very high. So it's something that people really need to be educated on. I'll stop there so Liam has time.
Thank you, Steve. Liam, you're up.
Yeah, we were just the other thing that we were talking about was sort of the normalization of things, and the people that I see with my role here is we don't see that as a primary substance very often when we see people in the capacity that I see them in the emergency department. We see that as a polysubstance use with other substances, and that's usually not the primary substance that people are seeking treatment for. I do think a lot of it is that sort of normalization of, well, yes, this is a mind-altering substance, but it's not that bad because it's not the worst one that I'm using, that kind of attitude. And I mean, they're right in a sense, but it is, it is an issue with, people saying they want to get treatment for all of these things that they recognize to be problem substances, but they don't always want to get treatment for that. And just sort of asking people what their motivation is in wanting to continue using that. And it's interesting, people have all different answers for that, but we also talked about kind of the normalization of it since it became legal to have a certain number of plants and a certain amount of product on you, and how it's not really seen as any different than having any other substance. I mean, when I was in high school, it was illegal to have a beer too, because I wasn't old enough, but that was like a normal thing to do. And now this is sort of the new version of that. And, they know that they're not 25 or 21 or whatever, but that's the substance that's accessible to them to use.
Thank you. So I'm hearing some common threads from both groups around some norming, just the lack of knowledge of the impacts and the feeling like there's far worse out there. This is a safer option. What do you all think might be, some good, community level initiatives to start to bring a higher awareness? And so who needs to be targeted with this information, and what types of information are people ready to receive? Because we know that if there's not readiness, then it's just falling on deaf ears. So Kai, I think you unmuted.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, when I quit drinking, I was looking at the consequences of my actions. And so I don't see that pot necessarily, we don't see consequences. You know what I mean? They're not so apparent as with the other substances that people use. I was just thinking about that.
It's an interesting thought, and it does seem like maybe over time, it affects people differently, and the concentrations as well.
My experience in being involved in this, it was basically, there was a political fight going on town by town here that Healthy Valley Lamoille is not you're not involved in the political fight, and that's pretty much over and lost. So now it's kind of looking at this problem set in a different way. Education, and my experiences in the political fight was you can't try to scare people with this, with your information, but you can provide good data. And the other side of this, there's a marketing side, there's a money-making engine behind cannabis, and they have a lot of data too, and they have a lot of statistics, and they're going to fight back with their statistics. So you better have some good stuff if you want to break out studies and graphs and things like that. That's been my experience.
I would
Katie?
agree. Yeah, I would agree with Steve. I think that it's impressive when you start looking at the financial driver that has changed so much legislation over the last couple of years. I mean, they're not making these things legal because they want to use it themselves. It's because they know that there's money there. I would say that one of the things that could be asked that might be interesting, just because we had a discussion in our group that was, I brought up the fact that when I was, historically, I think people used because they were thinking, it was fun, or they were trying to be a little bit rebellious, or it's what their friends were doing. But the conversations really changed, where people, even young people, are using because they have a diagnosis that they're treating, and this is how they're treating it. So they are treating, and so if you ask people like, why are you using that? Oh, it's because I have anxiety or ADHD or insomnia, and it's not like I'm using it because I want to have fun, or it's because of what my friends are doing. It's this diagnosis decision, which is really different in the way I think people are looking at it. There's like this personal justification behind it. So it's almost at the point now where we could say, just think about like why, and if you are treating your anxiety, so like maybe like giving them that and saying, so we acknowledge that you have that condition. Is this really the best way to treat it? So you're using this to treat something, and that's what's working for you. And you have this condition that you're worried about, or we're worried about, but is that really the best way to treat it? Or is that the only way to treat it? Now I know that our mental health resources are pretty stretched thin, so we could get into a whole conversation there, but it is really interesting to start thinking of asking people just why, instead of saying you can't or you shouldn't, or just say, so why? And what else could you be doing in addition to that to help that condition? Anyway.
Katie, so like I was saying, it's hard to scare people with marijuana information because there's a lot of counter and there's a lot of attitudes. But the education piece of letting someone know, an individual, that you are a target market, no matter what age you are, could be part of the education piece that's less about, hey, this is going to throw you off of your life goals, or this is going to hurt your brain. Those are messages that everyone's heard in health class, and they've heard it about alcohol and other things. But specifically, we have a marketing engine that is revving up right now in Vermont. They're going to have a big supply and demand, balancing act going on for the first couple of years, and making sure that every person out there knows, it's just like vape pens. I mean, people make money off of them, so that's why they sell them. And so I think that can be a big part of the messaging and education. It doesn't have anything to do with the medical effects. It's just letting you know that, hey, by the way, the reason this is here is because someone's making a ton of money off of it. Can sometimes be an effective message.
And I think that's one of the things that's worked really well combating tobacco. Traditional tobacco was the media literacy, the somebody's making money off of you approach. So.
Well, and this has followed the same exact playbook. I mean, when tobacco first came out, it was because it was first advertised as being medical. There was all these conditions it could help with. So there's a really great film that covers that it's following the same exact path as tobacco.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done here. Unfortunately, we're not going to solve everything today, but it's good to start to look at the root causes, the local conditions, because those will feed back into our logic models, and then we can start to identify, okay, here's where we can start to make a difference. Here's where there's some readiness, and we can really kind of go from there. Happy to meet with any of you individually for more follow-up or deeper conversations. I recognize there's a lot going on. This is a part of the meeting that we're getting ready to transition into, of just some announcements. So I'm dropping in the chat just some upcoming trainings and events. There's a Recovery Vermont Leadership Conference coming beginning of April. That same week is Prevention Day down in Montpelier, which if anybody's interested, we can get links to all of this for you. Prevention Day is just yet another great day to connect with our legislators. If you're free tonight, the Stowe varsity basketball teams, Kate's on one of those. They are doing a faculty student game, and they've chosen HLV as the recipient of the funds that are raised from that. So a big thank you to the Stowe basketball teams. And I think even more importantly than the funds is just the awareness in the community of the importance of this work and what we're doing. So we'll be there with information, and Brian's going to do some trivia at halftime. The next meeting is in April. Alison, do you want to share the topic of that meeting real quick?
Sure. So the Tobacco Task Force has been meeting about every 6 weeks, but also connecting. And it's our opportunity to share the work that's going on in the community currently around tobacco, but we wanted to kind of hone in on how to, like a skill building meeting of how to help our loved ones and peers and those around us, as well as ourselves, if that's the case, to quit. And there are so many resources out there, but sometimes it's hard to access them and hard to help, bring people from pre-contemplation to contemplation. And, so what are some of the ways that we can do that, and to share all of the quit resources locally and other, the classes that are local, and then all the other resources, whether it's text-based or whatnot, like how to really access those. And the other piece is we have a Green Up Day initiative that we've been doing the past few years, but really stepping it up this year. And so that is to help for communities to help us to know more about where they're finding the environmental remnants, the litter from substances in the community. And if there are spots that, have a high amount of certain kinds of substances, and how we can do this mapping that can help us also inform future interventions. But as part of Green Up Day, we have an additional survey, and we're encouraging different groups to, you've heard of like cigarette butt cleanup days and things like that, but this is a little bit expanded to, as you're doing Green Up Day, do it on your own or with a group or with an organized group from your organization to get involved with also completing this Green Up survey so that it gets across our whole region. And so be on the lookout for that. And if you think your agency or a group that might want to participate, we'll also have this, the survey out, but if you want to specifically be part of it, and I think we're going to have like listing all different people so that others can join in across the region. So we haven't done that in some years, at least since I've been back on the tobacco grant, when we got it back about 4 years ago after a 10-year hiatus in the Lamoille Valley. So that's coming in April.
So with the time we have left, do you all as coalition members, community partners, have things that you want others in the meeting today to know about? And you can either unmute yourself or drop those in the chat. And then the other thing is, as you're leaving, just a moment of gratitude. So if you want to also just chat one, put in the chat one thing or say out something that you're thankful for part of our communities or this meeting. So. And I love reading all of this. And this is still a new format for us. And so if there are ways that you see that we could make these meetings more beneficial for you or others, I definitely welcome that feedback. We're trying to make these more working meetings so they feel like we're moving you know, towards something bigger. I know sometimes it may feel like we've opened up a can of worms and it's just kind of open, you know, we're not always getting to find closure for each of these meetings, but these are really helpful on some level for us, but hopefully we want them to be helpful and beneficial for you all as well, and informing your work in the community. So happy to grab a cup of coffee or come to your office and chit chat, love to see prevention embedded throughout the community and everybody's work, because no one person or one group can hold it all. We each have our own spheres of influence. So thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.